Hello everyone. In this lecture, we are going to discuss the first thinker in our syllabus, that is Raja Rammohan Roy. And from Raja Rammohan Roy, we will be looking at three themes in his thought and in his work, that is religious reforms, modern education, freedom of press. So today we are going to discuss his social and religious reforms and his ideas about religion, society, and how he actually conceptualized the role of religion in the larger social and political space and sphere in India. So Raja Rammohan Roy, as many of you are aware, is considered as the father of modern India. Now, why is it so? Why he is regarded as the father of modern India? What is his contribution? And there one can look at his role not just in responding to the colonial challenges that was there. So the context in which he was writing and articulating his thought and ideas was a kind of situation where Britishers has established their rule in India, and then there is a kind of challenge to the Indian counterparts, as they do not have really a religion worth the name, and that religion is full of idolatry, superstitions, and all kind of ritual practices, which does not really help in cultivation of mind, cultivation of good human being, and things like that. And so he was articulating, thinking, and operating in a time where there was a kind of colonial dominance, and dominance not just military or the physical, but more so in the intellectual sphere as well, where everything which is Western and European is considered and regarded superior, not just by the colonials but by the many Indians also. So Raja Rammohan Roy was thinking in that context, where he is trying to establish or assert the good practices and the worthwhile ideas that was there in Indian intellectual tradition, including Hinduism, at the same time when he is actually criticizing many evil practices or bad practices in the Hinduism. So, and more than that, he was also arguing about the Western concepts and ideas, especially his views on modern education and freedom of press, that we are going to cover in next lectures. He provided some kind of legacy for the subsequent thinkers to think about, articulate, and develop on from the idea he was articulating in such context. So that's the reason he is considered as the father of modern India. In a sense, his focus on not just believing and practicing something because it has been practiced for many generations or for millennia, but because it is rationally convincing. So his focus is again on the rational approach to religion, to social reforms, to polity and the political process also. So that's the reason he is regarded as the father of modern India. In what ways he was contributing and articulating his ideas? So he was actively engaged in many ways, not just as his official capacity of a munshi, and also as a landlord and a petitioner, but also as someone who was deeply engaged in the social, political and religious issue of his time. So through his memoranda, books, public activities for religious, social, educational, economic and political reforms, he inaugurated liberal reformist modernization in India. So he was actually writing his text, he was actually debating with his contemporary peers and intellectuals, and thinking about the social, educational, economic and political reforms, which in a way establish a kind of liberal thinking in India, and began a new era of rational enlightenment discussion and debates about social and political issues in India. And that is also perhaps one of the reasons why he is categorized as or considered as father of modern India. Now, in his thought, what you see, and that is something related to the first introductory lecture we have had, is this kind of continuous evolution from a nationalist localized understanding or approach to the cosmopolitan international approach as well. So, again in Raja Rammohan Roy, you will find him as a cosmopolitan thinker, at the same time a nationalist reformer, and his focus being on the rationalist thinking. So, in his approach, why he is leading or a kind of break from the Indian intellectual tradition in the modern era is his focus on the rationalist thinking, rational approach to reform society, to reform religion, to reform polity, to respond to the colonial domination and things like that. So, in his thought also you will see a kind of deeper emotional intellectual engagement with the social and religious issue that concerns the national polity, that is his nation. So, he is a nationalist reformer in that sense. At the same time, his approach towards the monotheism, and we will discuss, he is actually also a cosmopolitan thinker in that sense. So, where his understanding of man, religion, society, polity is not just limited to his nation, but also can be applicable to the other nation as well, and that is the approach in most of the modern Indian political thinkers, as we will discuss in the next thinkers when we will discuss. Now, if we look at the influence on his thought, we will see a different kind of sources or intellectual tradition which influence his thought. So, that includes Perso-Arabic, classical Greek, and Vedantic, as well as the modern Western thought. So, in Raja Rammohan Roy, you see a kind of movement away from a narrow particularistic kind of understanding about religion, society, and the role of man, to a kind of more broader, and that more broader approach in his thought comes from his familiarity or understanding of different tradition or intellectual tradition of thought, which includes Perso-Arabic, because he was very familiar to the Perso-Arabic and Islamic tradition. His father and himself being very closely related to the Mughal Empire, and for 3 generations their family served the Mughal Empire. So, they were well aware, and because of his education, which we will discuss in a moment, he was well aware of the Perso-Arabic thought. The classical Greek and the modern Western thought he learned on his own through his education, through his familiarity with the colonial administration and thinkers, and also his deeply emotional intellectual engagement with Indian tradition of thought, particularly the Vedantic thought. So, in a way, in his thought you will find the amalgamation of all these different traditions that allow him to think about religion and society in a broader way, not in a narrower limited way of understanding. The second is, he was also influenced by the many historical incidents that was happening, especially the French Revolution and also the freedom movements in Spain, Ireland, and Latin America. So, these historical movements also influenced to a great extent his belief in the liberal ideas of individual, society, religion, etc. Now, the other point that you will see in Raja Rammohan Roy is his mastery over various languages, and that is also something which allow him to think about and read from various sources, from various tradition, and then develop his ideas on religion and society. So, he is a polyglot in the true sense of the term, where he is not just confined to any one tradition or any one language and had a kind of narrowistic, chauvinistic kind of ideas. So, he was very comparative, very broader in his understanding and articulation. So, he is considered to have mastery over 10 languages, which includes Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, English, Urdu, Hindi, Hebrew, Greek, Latin and French. So this mastery allow him to think about these ideas of religion, monotheism, pantheism and other things in a more broader and comparative ways. Now, if you look at his scholarly works, these are basically there are numerous tracts he wrote, but the most significant works is Tuhfat ul Muwahhidin, which is also translated as a gift to the deists, that conceptualize his major thinking and articulation about religion and the role of religion in social reforms or the rational thinking of human being. And also he was responding to the other challenges, especially the Christianity and the Christian missionary. So this text, the Percepts of Jesus, a guide to peace and happiness, is another such important work in his scholarly works. Now, if you look at his time, that's 1772 to 1883, and he was born into a high-ranking Orthodox Brahmin family in West Bengal, and this family has the distinction of serving the imperial Mughals for 3 generations, and that is why his familiarity with Arabic, Persian, Islamic sources and tradition. This long-standing service under the Mughals explains his familiarity with the Indo-Persian culture. Now, it is interesting to know about his education. So, he was educated in Persian and Arabic tradition in Patna, then where he studied many works including Quran and made to learn Persian and Arabic, and then he moved to Banaras, and in Banaras he studied many Hindu texts including many Vedas and Upanishads, and Katha Upanishad has some significant influence in his thought, and he began to understand this Vedant or Advait Vedant philosophy there in Banaras, and began to think seriously because of his prior knowledge or familiarity with Persian Arabic tradition. He began to also seriously think and reflect about a lot of Hinduism text and tradition, and then in his professional life, which began with this European service in 1803, when he becomes the Munshi, or what is called private secretary to the collector of Murshidabad, and that allows him to seriously study English language as well as the developments in contemporary Europe, that is the ideas of Bentham or utilitarian philosophy, the focus on greatest benefit to the greatest number. So in his approach, he was actually very broad in terms of his understanding about society and religion, because of his familiarity with different intellectual tradition, as I was saying in the beginning. Then in 1814, after serving in colonial administration for a decade or so, he decided to settle down in Calcutta, and for the next 15 years he was engaged in furious and at times very reactionary kind of debates with the orthodoxy, especially Hindu Pandits and the publicists, over the true meaning of Hinduism, and many issues including the Sati abolition, modern education and freedom of press. So on modern education and freedom of press, we are going to discuss it in our next 2 lectures, but here we will confine to this idea on social and religious reforms that he was advocating and articulating, debating with the many of his conservative friends. And here I'll just wish to name some thinkers. So on the one hand, he was responding to the conservatives among the contemporary intellectuals, where they were arguing that we should learn modern education, and that modern education should not interfere with our glorious or superior Hindu tradition or Hinduism, that kind of things. So he was in a sense engaged with the Hinduism and Hindu thought, but also aware of the many evil practices in Hinduism, and that challenge which he posed to such practices and such evil practices actually infuriated many of his conservative friends. He was also in that sense challenged by many radicals, right, like one Derozio. He was again a radical figure in among his contemporaries, who argues that it's very difficult to ascertain Raja Rammohan Roy position, because on the one hand he seems to criticize and attack Hinduism, at the same time he want to bring out the true meaning or true philosophy of Hinduism, and so it's a difficult proposition for many of his radical friends that he was taking. This period between 1814 to 1830s was a very productive period in his life in terms of his intellectual contribution, and also in terms of his mobilization of social and political opinions for abolition of a lot of evil practices, including sati, which we will discuss in a moment. So, during this period, as I was saying, the most productive phase of his life, he authored more than 60 tracts and pamphlets in all the three languages, English, Bengali and Sanskrit. So, this was most productive period in Raja Rammohan Roy's life. This period was also intentionally polemical and very productive, and he published along with those 60 tracts which I was telling you, 3 journals or newspapers in Bengali, also in bilingual, that is English in Bengali, and also in Persian. So, in Bengali he published Samvad Kaumudi, in bilingual he wrote Brahmanical magazines, and in Persian he wrote Mirat ul Akhbar. So, and through all these, most of the contents in all these newspapers or journals he himself wrote, and through papers he was articulating the modern liberal reformist ideas on religion, religious practices, and challenging many orthodoxy fundamentalist approach about religion and society. Now, in later part in 1830 he went to England to plead on behalf of Mughal emperor to enhance his pension, and he successfully argued enhancement of the pension for the Mughal emperor, and it was increased by 30,000 pounds on, and he has a wide network in England with MPs, with the leaders, and he also met the king there. But besides that petition, he also has his personal agenda. So, while in India he was talking about lots of liberal ideas and modern political discourse and developments that was taking place in Europe and elsewhere in the world, in England he was writing more about the economic circumstances, social circumstances, challenges of colonialism in India for the England. So, he was also intentionally engaged in the intellectual discussion and debates about the future of India, the condition of India, and how that can be reformed or enhanced, or how people can be empowered. And that intellectual engagement he continues to promote even when he went to England. Now, in 1832, as I was saying, he appeared before the select committees of House of Commons to be interrogated at length on the material and the moral condition in India under the company administration, and he wrote a number of tracts about such economic condition about India. Now, this testimony that he wrote, he gave to the select committee, it's a very valuable source material for the study of early Indian response to colonialism. Now, Raja Rammohan Roy was very conscious or aware of the fact that he was living in a situation when India is ruled by a foreign power, the British. The colonialism is the reality of Indian political and civil life. Now, in that condition, how Indian intellectuals articulated and responded to such colonial rule or colonial challenges. Raja Rammohan Roy was one of the towering figure among the intellectuals who responded to the challenges of colonialism, where he imbibed certain liberal principles or values that is there in the modern European political thought and thinking, at the same time deeply engaged or reflected upon the Hinduism and its value in the modern times. Raja Rammohan Roy died after a brief illness in England, where he is buried. So, in his short life, most productive life he had in India is from 1815 to 1833, where he wrote a number of treatises, had argumentation with conservative as well as the radicals, and also his intellectual works like Tuhfat ul Muwahhidin, I was telling you, and the other works he produced during that time, and also led the political social mobilization for the abolition of sati, modern education, and other reforms in modern India. Now, if we talk about his religious reforms, so one can reflect his approach to religion from his quotation, where he writes that there is always an innate faculty existing in the nature of mankind, that in case any person of sound mind, before or after assuming the doctrine of any religion, makes an inquiry into the nature of the principle of the religious doctrines. Now, here it's a very significant quote, where he is arguing about the role of rational decision on the part of individual before conforming, before following, or before accepting any religious doctrines or principle of religious doctrines. So, he is considered such inquiry as a result, and he is very selective in his word, that sound mind. So, you should not follow any religious practices or religious principles because it is written somewhere, or because it is being followed for generation or for centuries, until and unless you use your own faculty, which he calls innate faculty, to rationally decide, to rationally understand, to rationally argue, to rationally inquire. Until and unless you are convinced through your rational inquiry about the principles of any religious doctrines, you should not follow it, and that is his approach, that is his rational approach towards social and religious reforms movement. Now, for Raja Rammohan Roy, in the historical context in which he was articulating and arguing, the immediate problematic was the social and religious degeneration that he saw around his existence or his local communities or in India at large. Now, this social and religious degeneration one can understand by the wide prevalence of ignorance, superstitions, idolatry, polygamy, and infanticide. So, this is some of the major challenges that Raja Rammohan Roy faced, and he thought the very capacity, the innate faculty to reason, to argue, to inquire is actually degenerated because of this wide prevalence of some of the challenges that is mentioned here. And even the idolatry, so people are deeply religious, but that religiosity does not come from their rational approach to that religion. And so, what happens here in this kind of practices, you follow a religion, you claim to be deeply religious, but that religiosity do not help you to cultivate your mind, to cultivate your thinking, to help you to develop morality, to help you to have better ethics. So, for him, more than the so what you have here is a kind of form of religion which is widely practiced, believed in, and followed, but it lacks the very spirit which helps you to develop morality, to develop ethics, to develop individuality, to think about social and political issue in a rational manner. So, Raja Rammohan Roy was finding these things as a kind of major challenges and significant reason for the political or the social degeneration of his own people, and he was challenging, he was responding not just to the colonial administrators and their domination about Hinduism or the debasedness or what is called this inferiority or superstitions and other practices in India, but also he was challenging or responding to the widely prevalent evil practices in his society. Now, in his idea, if you have religious reforms, that can also lead to social reforms as well as transformation in the society. So, for him, religious reforms is not just a personal matter limited to the individual, and through that one can achieve or accomplish spiritual heights or other things. For him, the religious reforms is at the center of social and as well as the political transformation in Indian society. Now, from his wide-ranging or comparative study of religions in the world, he considers the three basic tenets of all religions, and these three basic tenets in all religions, particularly Islam, Christianity, Hinduism and other major religions of the world, is belief in one universal supreme being. And from here he developed his thought on monotheism, which we will discuss. Then the belief in the existence of the soul. So, for him the soul is as significant in human being as his material, social and political well-being and the existence. So, the soul, and especially when he talks about religion and religious reforms, so he was critical of practices and rituals or ceremonies which merely satisfy the form of any organized religion. He was more concerned towards the soul or the spirit of religion, which enables the individual to develop morality, to develop ethics, and then better contribute in his personal and also in his community social life. So, for him the religious reforms in that sense is at the basis of both social and political transformation, including the cultivation of human mind, thinking, developing morality and ethics. So, for him the soul, which he believes is the part of the basic tenets in all the religions, which believes in the existence of soul and then believes in the life after death. So, he considered these three principles as the basic tenets that is there in all the religions, and he, as I was saying in the beginning, was well familiar with the many religious texts, including in Islam or in Christianity and his study of Hinduism. Raja Rammohan Roy developed his ideas on Hinduism or the role of religion from his wide-ranging understanding or comparative understanding of religion in the world. Now, what he also find in most of the religion, besides these three basic tenets, and you will find that this kind of thought is also there in Vivekananda or in Aurobindo or many other modern, including to some extent Gandhi. Ishwar Allah Teru Naam Sab Kuch Sammati Di Bhagwan. So, for him this God in any religion is one and the same, and in many Hindu tradition there is this belief that there is only one God. Different peoples call him in different names, but essentially the existence of God is in singular. There is only one God. So, that's his understanding, but what he finds also is in all the religions there are many false and objectionable dogmas and doctrines, including in Hinduism as well as in many other religions, including Christianity. Now, specifically in Hinduism, his attack is on polytheism and also idolatry. So, the idol worship and that worship is considered as the the major religious or representative of the religiosity or religious behavior of the individual. And the polytheism, you know, the kind of gods that you have in India, and he believes that these polytheistic gods actually creates sectarian morality. Sectarian morality means limited to one locality, one community, and that kind of things, not about the universal or modern rational man living and contributing in larger society, starting in his or her nation state, but also thinking about globally or universally and responding and contributing to some of the global and international challenges. So his approach, and that's why he is also not a nationalist reformer, not just a nationalist reformer, but also a cosmopolitan thinkers, because his approach is towards the universal, towards the global. So in his religious doctrine, now we will discuss about the objectionable dogmas or practices that he had found in Hinduism, and the two is polytheism and idolatry. Now these practices are there in other traditions as well, but we will focus more on Hinduism. Now in his articulation of religion and true religion, he focused on the monotheism. There is only one singular, and to a great extent it is influenced by Islamic idea of Allah as one supreme being, and many Hindu treatises as well. So this is one of the most significant aspect of his religious thought. Now he believed that monotheism is the fundamental message of Vedanta. So the pantheism, the idea of millions of gods, and which led Christian missionaries to criticize Hinduism, because there is so many god and goddesses, and there is no one organized religion or text or philosophy, and that puzzled them, that made them believe that superiority of Christianity, and there is only one religion, that is Christian religion, and that's why they promoted religious conversion and such things. So for Raja Rammohan Roy in Hinduism particularly, he considered Vedanta and its message of one single God as the basic source for his understanding of monotheism, and he continuously promoted his understanding of this kind of understanding of monotheism rather than pantheism that was widely prevalent, supported by lot of conservative friends and intellectuals. And Raja Rammohan Roy had to suffer because of his beliefs in monotheism, against idolatry. He was actually excommunicated, and he had to constantly fight this conservative argument about maintaining the status quo about religion and religious practices, especially the orthodoxy. So his idea of a single Unitarian God was his corrective to the polytheism of Orthodox Hinduism and to also Christian Trinitarianism. So in Christianity also there developed after some time this idea of Trinitarianism, and in Hinduism we are well aware of the existence of millions of gods. So he thought this monotheism, this Unitarian God, is a corrective measure for such kind of beliefs, especially promoted by the Orthodox section of Hinduism. So he believed that monotheism supported one universal moral order for humanity, while polytheism justifies sectarian morality. As I was saying, that different community having different gods, and their understanding, their moral, ethical behavior guided by such practices is actually sectarian in its approach, whereas Raja Rammohan Roy was arguing about a morality or ethics which is universal and applicable to the whole humanity, not just one. And that is a kind of shift from a nationalist approach to a cosmopolitan global approach in his thought even on religion, religious morality and ethics, and that makes him a very fascinating, and as I was saying, the first modern Indian thinker to articulate the ideas about religion, society and politics in a very rational and modern way. Now, his argument with Christian missionary was to establish the strength of Hinduism, even when he himself acknowledged some of the evil practices in Hinduism. So, he believed that Hinduism is not inferior, where Christian missionaries were not happy with his approach, because for them it's the Christian or Christianity which is only the true religion, and that's why they wanted conversion. So, Raja Rammohan Roy believed that Hinduism is not inferior to Christianity, although he admitted that the Christ's central teaching can lead mankind to universal love and harmony. So, while he acknowledges the contribution of Christ, which will lead, if followed truly by the mankind, to universal love and harmony, to peace, to happiness, but he refused to acknowledge Christ as a divinity. So, he believed that the original Vedantic message of the unity of God was superior to the anthropomorphic conception of God contained in the Bible. It is because Christianity justifies the death of Christ for the atonement of man's sin against God. However, Vedanta teaches that sincere repentance and solemn meditation can establish victory over sin. So, here Raja Rammohan Roy is arguing against the Christian biblical anthropomorphic understanding or conception of God, where one person sacrifices his life for the sin of others, for the empowerment of others. He believes in the Vedantic teaching, which believes that the sincere approach, sincere repentance and meditation will actually establish the victory over sin, and every individual himself or herself is capable of overcoming such sins and practices. Okay. Now, so to briefly discuss his views on Sati, which is the practices he challenged not just politically or socially or emotionally, but also using a number of religious texts. So, his approach to Sati, which is a social problem, but it has some religious sanction, and he rejected or he challenged such practices using the religions. So, religious reforms or his social religious thought is not just about a scholastic debate over the meaning of true religion or true message of Hinduism or true meaning of Hinduism, but also to remove, to eradicate widely prevalent practices like Sati. So, Sati and his views on Sati represents his social religious thought. He rejected this theory that wife can or has to sacrifice herself for the sin of her husband, and he cited many religious texts to show that these texts actually permitted the wife to continue her life even after husband's death. So, mainly because of his arguments, and for this he was fiercely opposed by the orthodox section of Hindu society, including his own family, especially his father, and he was actually giving the reason for abolishing Sati using the religious texts, ancient Hindu religious texts, which permitted women to live the life even after the death of her husband. And largely because of his argument and political public mobilization, Lord William Bentinck legally banned Sati in 1829. So, this is the greatest contribution of Raja Rammohan Roy perhaps in the history of modern India, where his approach to religion, religious practices helped in formulating a law which ban a widely accepted or prevalent practices of Sati in India. If we look at his views on caste, which is a bit ambiguous. Now, he actually practiced or used sacred thread all his life, and yet he was very ambiguous about the practices of caste in India. Now, he believed in principle that God makes no distinction of caste. It is the man-made distinction that is there, and he considered this division between and among the caste is one of the reason for want of unity among the Indians. So, he wanted caste to be reformed, and that is the basis for the overall unity among the Indians. So, but in his practices he continued to wear sacred thread, and that is why his views on caste remain somewhat ambiguous. His approach, and if we assess his thought, his religious thought, what we find is he tries to protect the true spirit of Hinduism, and to protect this true spirit of Hinduism he fought the orthodoxy on the one hand and the external force on the other. So, he protected the true spirit of Hinduism or Hindu religion from both internal and external threat. The internal threat came from the Brahmins or the orthodoxy or the orthodox section of Hinduism, which tries to protect the Hindu or Hinduism, and that did not allow the large section of Indians to understand what is the true meaning, what is the true message of the text, because that is in the Sanskrit, which is in the possession of the Brahmins alone. So, he was trying to protect Hinduism from the Brahmins on the one hand, that is the internal threat, and the Christian missionaries and their practices of conversion, which is the external threat from the outside. So, for the practices of dogmas and other ritual ceremonious practices, he considered the priestly class, especially Brahmins, for the promotion and maintaining the status quo, because it helps in their personal benefits and not in the benefit of those who are actually doing such practices, rituals and ceremonious practices, because ultimately the role of religion is to uplift the man, to enable the man to develop certain morality and ethics, which will come once that person or individual approach the religion and religious doctrine rationally, and on that basis develop certain ethics and morality. That is what he was focusing, not on the practices of rituals and dogmas that was promoted by the priestly class. The Christian missionaries that was operating in different parts of India, they attacked Hinduism on several ways by abusing and ridiculing the gods and saints in Hinduism. They believed the excellency or the superiority of Christianity, and there is nothing worthy or worthy enough to be followed or accepted by the men. And actually if such practices, that means different gods, saints, their beliefs and values practices, it does not really cultivate the better things in human being or the individual. It actually helps them to degenerate. So, that is the Christian missionaries' understanding of Hinduism and Hindu practices. Now, they also had some allurement in terms of material benefits to convert them to Christianity. What is the approach for religious reforms in Raja Rammohan Roy's thought? First, he exposed the irrational religious practices and dogmas. So, while he is establishing the superiority or not superiority, the true meaning, the true message of Hinduism, he is also articulating or identifying the irrational practices and dogmas in Hinduism. So, that is his one approach. The second is to promote Western liberal education. We will discuss it in our next class or next lecture. And then he is also identifying or acknowledging the role of state to support these two programs, to eradicate the social and religious dogmas and superstitions, and also in the promotion of Western liberal education, he acknowledged the role of state. And that is why he is the first modern Indian political thinkers in a way which believes in and acknowledge the role of state in reforming society, in reforming religion, bringing about liberal education. That is something which helps in the overall development of individual and society in general. So, that is the three approach we can find in Raja Rammohan Roy. about social reforms movement. He also believes and himself established some association to as an instrument for social and political transformation. So in 1815, see, he established Atmiya Sabha. In 1821, he established the Calcutta Unitarian Association, and in 1828 he established Brahmo Samaj, which is later came to be known as the Brahmo Samaj. And this is something which remains or which contributed in transforming the individual and the community about their views on true religion, or enable them to fight the superstitions, irrational dogmas and practices that was widely prevalent. So he considered these sabhas as a kind of instrument for social and political transformation in the society. So these kind of sabhas and association promoted his ideas of monotheism, true religion, spirit of religion, which helps in the establishing or developing morality or cultivating morality and ethics in individuality. There he did not follow in any kind of creed or any kind of division on the basis of caste, religion, or any such social affirmative identities. So these sabhas and associations were open for all sections of society, including men and women. So that is his contribution. Now the theology. So if we talk about, so Brahma Samaj remains and played a very significant role in reforming a lot of social and religious evil practices in Bengal and also in other parts of India, and it was first association which really help in the organization of traditional orthodox society to think or articulate about religion in a very different way. So the theological basis of organization that Rammohan Roy founded in 1828, that is Brahma Sabha, was the theistic reading of the Upanishads, which he interpreted as promulgating a non-ritualistic interior worship of the one true being. So that's the focus of Brahma Samaj, where there is no idol worship, no scripture, no preaching. It's like individual engagement with the one supreme being, which is the spirit or the true meaning of any religion which he believes. So there was no ritual, ceremonial practices that was there in the Brahma Sabha. It focuses on the interior worship, the personal worship of one true being that comes from his monotheistic belief. He tried to end the monopoly of orthodox Brahmins over the sacred texts. Now that's also his significant contribution in social religious reforms, where in India you have a very small section of society which controls over the access of religious texts to the larger section. So because these texts are in Sanskrit and learning of Sanskrit was limited to a particular section, Raja Rammohan Roy opposed to such restriction as far as the access to the religious text and sacred text in Hinduism was concerned. So he wanted to make such texts available to the larger public in their vernacular language, and he argued that the ancient Hindu texts and the Vedas, including Upanishad, upheld the doctrine of monotheism. And to prove this point, he actually translated many Hindu sacred texts from Sanskrit into Bengali, and that's the beginning when you find in many modern Indian languages there is the translation from original Sanskrit in the local languages, so that people themselves can read such texts in their own language and then develop their understanding or find out the true meaning or the true message of Hindu religion. For him was the monotheistic belief in. So that's the overall understanding of Raja Rammohan Roy and his beliefs in religious reforms, and why religious reforms is the basis for the social and political transformation as well. And against the colonial regime also, this is the interesting point to note, that the response of Indians to the colonial domination or hegemony, not just in military, political, physical sense, but also in the intellectual space, the response that comes is from the vocabulary which is deeply religious. Now, and that is there on the both sides, Christian missionaries and colonial administration promoting, patronizing such Christian missionary on the one hand, and many Indian intellectuals and thinkers articulating about this true meaning, the superiority in a sense of Hinduism on the other. You find Raja Rammohan Roy somewhat uncomfortable with this assertion on the part of Christianity or Christian missionaries that Christian or Christianity is the only true religion. On the other hand, the conservative which believes in the status quo, idol worship, or in fact sanctioning certain evil practices like sati and many other ritualistic ceremonial practices in Hinduism, which in no way help in the individual self improvement or empowerment. Raja Rammohan Roy was using rational approach to understand the true meaning of any religion, yet he was against this assertion of superiority from superiority of religion on the part of Christianity. There is one anecdote which help us to understand this more. So there was one kind of rumor that he because of his criticism of idol worship or irrational practices in Hinduism, he was converted to Christianity. And there was one Christian missionary which sent him a kind of pleasing or greetings and welcomed him in the true fold or true religion or superior religion of Christianity. To which Raja Rammohan Roy replied that I am not someone who is going to leave one kind of superstitions and irrational practices to join other kind of superstitions and irrational practices. So he was uncomfortable with the irrational, superstitious or ignorant practices and belief systems in all the religion. Yet at the same time he was establishing the true meaning of all the religion is more or less same, which you will find is there in other thinkers as well, like Vivekananda, Aurobindo Ghosh, to some extent Tagore, and also certainly Gandhi. So he was actually trying to establish the true meaning of religion, which will help in the empowerment of individual as well as the society, the community. So he considered the religious reforms in India as the basis for social and political transformation as well. So using the idiom to respond to the colonial challenges in the idioms of religion, where the true meaning of religion is there in the monotheism, and Brahma Samaj and other associations, certainly Brahma Samaj played a very significant role in promoting his ideals. So on this theme of religious reforms in the thinking of Raja Rammohan Roy, you can look at this political thought in modern India by Bentham and Hughes. You can also look at MP Singh and Himanshu Rai's their book on Indian political thought, themes and thinkers, again on Raja Rammohan Roy. From Ramchandra Guha you can also find on Raja Rammohan Roy, and this book you can find some of the original excerpts from Raja Rammohan Roy about religious reforms, monotheism, colonial response, and etc. So that's all for today. Thank you.